Amina had always felt like a small shadow in a world full of bright lights. She was the kind of girl who could walk into a room and no one would realize she was there. She didn't try to hide. She didn't try to be invisible. But life had a way of placing her in the quiet corners where people rarely looked. From childhood, she had learned that some people were naturally noticed, and some were not. And she believed she belonged to the second group. She grew up in a home where everyone was busy with their own problems. Her mother worked long hours, often leaving early in the morning and returning late in the evening. Her father was a quiet man who loved reading newspapers and didn't really know how to express emotions. They cared for her, but they didn't connect with her. They didn't sit down to ask how school went or whether she had made friends. They didn't know she sat alone most of the time. They didn't know she felt like an unwanted extra piece in the puzzle of life as a child. She used to draw pictures to make her parents smile, hoping they would praise her. But most of the time, her drawings stayed on the fridge unnoticed until the paper curled at the edges and fell off on its own. She remembered one moment very clearly. She had drawn a small house with a family of 3 standing outside. She had waited for her mother to come home so she could show it. But when her mother finally arrived, exhausted from work, she didn't even notice the paper Amina held. She hugged her, smiled, and walked straight to her room to rest. Amina stood there with her drawing, watching as the moment she had imagined melted away. She folded the drawing carefully and kept it in her school bag, telling herself it didn't matter. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "Maybe I'm not important enough." School was not any different. On the playground, she would sit on the far end of the bench, silently observing other children playing tag, skipping ropes, or chatting loudly. No one ever came to her and said, "Want to join us?" And even though she wanted to, she never had the courage to ask. She would watch groups of children laughing, their faces bright with energy. She wondered how it felt to be included so naturally. Teachers liked her because she never caused trouble. She was the kind of student who did her work quietly, never argued, never questioned, and always followed instructions. But she was rarely called on in class. If a teacher needed a volunteer, they usually picked the more confident, louder children. If groups were formed, she was often the last to be chosen, placed usually in whichever group had one spot left. Kids didn't mean to push her aside. They simply didn't think about her at all. She blended too well into the background. Over time, she learned to accept this as her truth. She started believing something was wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't interesting enough. Maybe people didn't want her around. Maybe she was boring. She carried these thoughts like invisible bags on her shoulders. She didn't complain. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She just kept everything inside, hoping one day someone would see past her silence. As she grew older, her world didn't change much. She still preferred to sit alone at lunch, opening her lunchbox slowly, eating in small bites, and watching others talk around her. Sometimes she tried to smile at people passing by. But most of the time they were lost in their own conversations, unaware of her presence. Even on her birthdays, she didn't expect much. There were no big celebrations, no surprises. Her parents gave her a simple card, or sometimes forgot until the next day. She always told them it was okay, even though her heart wished for something small, maybe just someone hugging her and saying, "I'm glad you were born." But she never got moments like that, so she created her own world inside her mind. She imagined friends who listened. She imagined someone sitting beside her and treating her like she mattered. She imagined a day when she wouldn't feel like a shadow, but like someone whose presence brought warmth to her room. Her imagination became the only place where she felt wanted. When she entered her teenage years, she became even quieter. She avoided after-school clubs because she thought no one wanted her there. She avoided group projects because she didn't want to slow anyone down. She kept her dreams to herself, believing they were too small to matter. She learned to walk with soft steps, as if she didn't want to disturb the world. She had a gentle heart, full of kindness. But she rarely expressed it because she thought her kindness wouldn't be valued. People who met her briefly described her as polite, calm, and well-mannered. But no one ever said she was memorable. Even classmates who sat beside her for months forgot her name easily. She would smile politely and remind them, pretending it didn't hurt. But every forgotten moment added another layer to her belief that she was not someone worth. Remembering there were times when she tried to change, She once wore a bright scarf to school, hoping it would draw some attention, but no one noticed. Another time she tried to speak more in class, but her voice came out too soft, and the teacher quickly moved on to the next student. She tried joining a group conversation once, but she spoke at the wrong moment and everyone continued, talking without hearing her. Little things like these shaped her understanding of herself. She wasn't angry at people. She wasn't jealous. She didn't complain. She simply accepted that she was the quiet one no one truly saw. She believed she was unwanted not because anyone told her directly, but because life had shown it to her in small, silent ways, and yet deep inside her heart, she had a tiny spark of hope that refused to die. She didn't even realize it was still there, but it lived quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. She didn't know that life had a surprise waiting for her. She didn't know that all the lonely days, all the quiet corners, all the silent tears she shed at night would one day lead her to a moment that would change everything. A moment she never saw coming. A moment that would make her feel like she mattered, like she was worth noticing, like she was someone precious. At this point in her life, though, she had no idea what was ahead. She continued living her days in silence, believing she was unwanted, unaware that destiny had prepared a gentle twist for her, a twist that would rewrite the way she saw herself forever. Amina's life moved forward, but her loneliness moved with her, following her like a quiet shadow she could never get rid of. As she stepped into adulthood, she hoped things would change. She hoped that college, work, and new environments would help her find people who might understand her. But the same patterns continued, almost as if she carried an invisible sign that said she preferred silence. Even when she did in college, she walked through crowded hallways where laughter and chatter filled the air. Groups of students walked together, sharing jokes and stories. But Amina walked alone, clutching her books close to her chest, her steps gentle and unsure. She tried not to stand out, not because she was hiding, but because she didn't know how to fit in. She would sit at the back of the classroom, listening quietly, while others engaged freely. When teachers asked questions, she knew the answers, but she didn't raise her hand. She feared her voice would tremble, or that people might look at her strangely. So she chose silence again and again. Sometimes, she tried to smile at classmates, but the smiles were returned quickly and politely, ending before any conversation could begin. Other times, she sat alone at lunch, opening her small lunchbox slowly and eating quietly, while others enjoyed meals with friends. She told herself she didn't mind. She told herself she was used to it. But deep inside, she wished someone would join her. Even for a moment, Amina often wondered what it felt like to be someone people remembered. She saw students being called by name, invited into groups, or asked to join activities. She watched them share secrets and dreams, laughing freely, not worrying about being accepted because they already belonged. She wanted that feeling, the feeling of belonging, but she didn't know how to reach it. As the years passed, she grew better at pretending she was fine. When people asked how she was doing, she always answered with words like, "I'm okay," or "I'm good." She never told anyone about the heaviness in her heart. She never explained the quiet ache that came from sitting alone day after day. She felt that people wouldn't understand. Or worse, she feared they might think she was seeking attention. So she kept her feelings tucked inside. It's like letters she wrote but never sent. When she graduated and started working, her routine changed, but her loneliness did not. She found a small job in an office where she worked diligently and quietly. Her coworkers liked her, but they didn't know her. They greeted her politely in the morning and thanked her when she finished tasks, but no deeper connection formed. They discussed weekend plans with each other, organized small outings, and talked comfortably during breaks. Amina usually sat at her desk, nibbling on a biscuit and scrolling through her phone, pretending she was busy so no one would notice she was alone. It wasn't that people ignored her on purpose. In fact, some coworkers tried to include her, but she often stepped back, afraid she would say something wrong or make them uncomfortable. Once, a coworker invited her to join a lunch group. She agreed, but during the lunch she barely spoke. She listened to others talk about movies, families, and travels, but she didn't know when to join in. By the time she gathered the courage to say something, the topic had already changed. She left feeling embarrassed, convincing herself that she didn't belong there. Over time, she stopped joining group lunches altogether. Her evenings were quiet. She usually returned home, ate dinner alone, and sat by her window watching the streetlights glow. Sometimes she played soft music to fill the silence of her room. Other times, she read books that took her to different worlds. Worlds where characters found love, friendship, and acceptance. She imagined herself in those stories, but reality felt far from them. Despite everything, Amina never stopped caring for others. She always held doors open for strangers, offered her seat to older people on buses, and helped coworkers with tasks even when they didn't ask. She believed kindness was something she could always give, even if she received little in return. But sometimes, when she lay in bed at night, she wondered if anyone ever noticed her efforts. She wondered if they ever thought about her after she walked away. Her belief that she was unwanted grew slowly but steadily. It's like a small plant that received just enough sadness to stay alive. She didn't blame anyone. She blamed herself. She thought maybe she was too quiet, too simple, too soft. She thought maybe the world preferred people who were loud, bright, and confident. She wasn't any of those things. So she convinced herself she was easy to overlook. There were moments she questioned her worth. She asked herself why she never formed deep connections. She asked why friendships slipped away from her before they even began. She asked if she was doing something wrong without realizing it. These questions filled her mind during long, silent nights. When the world outside slept peacefully and she carried her thoughts alone, one day, after work, she visited a nearby park to clear her mind. She often went there when her heart felt heavy. She liked the calmness of the trees, the sound of children playing at a distance, and the fresh breeze that reminded her she was still alive. She would sit on her favorite bench, the one under a large tree that gave shade. She watched people pass by, families, couples, joggers, and friends sharing laughter. She felt like an observer, never part of the picture. Sometimes she wondered if people could see the loneliness in her eyes. But most walked past her without noticing. She didn't blame them. Everyone had their own lives, their own worries. Why would anyone stop for someone like her? Yet even in all this loneliness, Amina continued to dream quietly. She dreamed of a day when someone would sit beside her and not leave quickly. She dreamed of a conversation that didn't feel forced. She dreamed of someone who would see her not the silent girl she pretended to be, but the gentle soul she really was. She didn't know if such a moment would ever come. But her heart hoped for it anyway. She didn't realize that life often surprises people at the most unexpected times. She didn't know that in the middle of her quiet routine, something small but powerful was waiting for her. A meeting she'd never planned. A moment she didn't expect. A connection that would show her she was never truly unwanted. She didn't know that someone would soon sit beside her in a way that would touch her heart deeply, changing her entire understanding of herself. But at this point, all she felt was a long road of loneliness stretching behind her and ahead of her. She walked it gently, believing she would always walk alone, not knowing that the road was about to turn. Amina didn't know that the quiet afternoon she chose to visit the park would become a memory she would hold close for the rest of her life. It was one of those soft, gentle days when the sky looked calm and the sun wasn't too bright. The breeze carried a peaceful feeling that made the whole place seem softer than usual. Amina walked slowly toward her usual bench under the large tree, the bench that had become her silent companion on lonely days. She sat down, she always did, placing her small bag beside her. She watched the leaves on the tree above her move gently in the wind. Children were playing somewhere far off, and their laughter floated in the air like tiny bells. A few people walked their dogs. Some jogged past with headphones on. Everyone seemed to have someone or something keeping them company. And there she was alone, as always. Amina didn't feel angry or sad. She simply felt used to it. She sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes drifting from the sky to the ground. She didn't expect anything to happen. She didn't imagine anyone would approach her. This was just another day of silence. A day she would return home from without anything changing, but life sometimes creates its important moments out of ordinary ones. On the other side of the park, a man named Hassan was taking his usual walk. Hassan was someone who noticed people more than most did. He was the kind of person who saw small details, a tired look on someone's face, a child dropping a toy, an elderly person needing help. He didn't notice these things because he was trying to be kind. He just naturally paid attention. He had seen Amina before on this bench. Not just once, but many times. Each time he passed by, he sensed something gentle and quiet about her. Most people walked past her without paying attention, but something about her loneliness always caught his eye. He wondered about her story. He wondered why someone who looked so thoughtful and calm always sat alone that day. As he walked past her again, he noticed something different. She wasn't just sitting alone. She looked tired from inside, as if her heart was carrying something heavy. Her eyes weren't sad, but they weren't bright either. They were the eyes of someone who had been silent for too long. He slowed down, his steps becoming softer. For a moment he wondered if he should keep walking. He didn't want to disturb her. He didn't want her to think he had wrong intentions. But something gently pushed him forward. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was kindness. Maybe it was the truth that sometimes people need someone to sit beside them without asking questions. Hassan walked toward the bench slowly, careful not to startle her. Amina looked up when she sensed someone approaching, and for a brief second her heart tightened. She thought he was probably looking for a place to sit for a moment before moving on. She assumed he would sit, check his phone, and leave like others did. She prepared herself for another temporary presence, but Hassan didn't sit down immediately. He gave her a soft, warm smile, the kind of smile that didn't feel forced or polite. It felt human. He nodded slightly, silently asking if he could sit beside her. She nodded back. Her nod was shy, quiet, almost hesitant. He took a seat, leaving a respectful space between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't strange. It wasn't uncomfortable. It felt calm, almost soothing. Amina was surprised by this. Usually when someone sat near her, she felt tense and awkward. But this felt different. She felt no pressure to talk. She felt no need to pretend. After a few minutes, Hassan took out an extra coffee cup from the small bag he carried. It was warm, fresh, and still smelled rich. He placed it gently beside her on the bench. Not too close, not suddenly, just softly, with care. He didn't say, "Here, take it." He didn't force anything. He simply placed it there, giving her the freedom to choose. Amina looked at the cup, surprised. She looked at him, unsure if it was really meant for her. Hassan smiled again and said, "I had an extra one. If you'd like it, it's yours. If not, no problem." His voice was calm, kind, and carried no pressure. For a moment she hesitated. She wasn't used to people offering her anything, not because she wasn't deserving, but because most people never noticed her. She slowly reached for the cup, her fingers touching its warmth. She whispered a soft thank you. Her voice almost faded into the wind, but Hassan heard it. He nodded gently and said, "You're welcome," as if her small thank you mattered deeply. They sat together in silence again, sipping coffee. Amina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt acknowledged, not judged, not pitied, just acknowledged. Someone had sat beside her by choice. Someone had noticed her without her asking, and someone was sharing a moment with her without expecting anything in return. Hassan didn't talk much. He didn't ask her personal questions. He didn't try to make the silence disappear. Instead, he allowed it to exist naturally. Every now and then, he would comment softly on something small, like the breeze or the weather. Amina answered with small, shy replies. Surprised at how comfortable she felt, she realized he wasn't trying to fill the silence. He was trying to share it with her. After almost 20 minutes, he finally spoke a little more. "I see you here sometimes," he said, his tone polite. "You always sit so calmly. It's rare to see someone enjoy quiet moments." Amina felt a blush rise on her cheeks. No one had ever noticed her habits before. No one had ever said something so simple, yet so thoughtful. She looked down at her hands and said softly, "I come here often. It feels peaceful." Hassan nodded. "It does. Peace is important." His words felt gentle, almost comforting. Amina felt a small warmth spreading inside her chest, a feeling she didn't recognize at first. It was the feeling of someone treating her presence as something meaningful, not something empty. The way Hassan sat beside her didn't feel like someone sitting next to a stranger. It felt like someone sitting next to a person he respected, a person he valued, a person he wanted to understand. Amina had never experienced that before. She felt like she mattered. She felt like someone important not because he praised her, but because he treated her with a softness that made her feel seen. Minutes passed. The breeze continued to rustle the leaves above them. The sky slowly shifted its colors as the afternoon moved toward evening. Amina didn't want the moment to end, and yet she didn't want to cling to it either. She simply wanted to be present, to breathe, to feel what she was feeling. Hassan eventually stood up, but not abruptly. He took his time, as if he didn't want to disturb the peaceful air around them. He looked at her and gave another gentle smile. "It was nice sitting here," he said softly. "Maybe I'll see you again." Amina nodded. She wanted to say something more, something that would express how much the moment had meant to her, but she didn't know how. So she simply said, "Thank you for sitting with me." Hassan's eyes softened. "You deserve company," he said kindly. "Everyone does." Then he walked away, leaving her sitting there with a warm cup in her hands and an even warmer feeling in her heart. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel unwanted. She felt like someone had seen her not through her silence, but through her soul. That simple moment, that quiet presence, touched her more deeply than he could have imagined. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing. Someone had sat beside her as if she mattered, and that small act began to change everything inside her. Amina returned to the park the next day with a feeling she could not fully explain. She walked slowly, feeling the familiar calm of the place, but something inside her had changed. It was subtle, gentle, like a tiny light had been turned on inside her heart. She didn't expect Hassan to be there again. She didn't come hoping for anything. She came because the bench under the big tree had become more than just a seat. It had become a place where, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. She sat down carefully, the same way she always did, but today she felt less heavy. Her shoulders were not as tense. Her breathing was softer. She looked at the leaves above her, and instead of feeling alone, she felt surrounded by a quiet comfort. She still didn't understand why one simple moment had affected her so deeply, but she didn't try to analyze it. She just let herself feel it. Minutes passed quietly. A few people walked by. A dog barked in the distance. A child laughed as he tried to chase a butterfly. Amina watched life around her, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was on the outside looking in. She felt closer to the world, even though she wasn't talking to anyone. And then, almost like a gentle whisper from fate, she saw Hassan walking toward the bench again. Her heart skipped a beat, not a loud or dramatic beat, just a small, surprised one. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't searching. He was simply walking the same path he had walked yesterday. When he reached the bench, he gave her the same warm, respectful smile he had given her before. "You're here," he said softly. Amina nodded, feeling a shy warmth in her chest. "Yes, I like sitting here. It's peaceful," he replied. "Mind if I join you again?" Her answer came naturally, without hesitation. "You can sit." He sat down, leaving the same comfortable space between them. The air around them felt familiar, as if the silence they shared yesterday had returned to sit with them again. Neither of them rushed into conversation. They made space for the quiet, letting it settle gently around them. After a few minutes, Hassan spoke softly. "The park feels different when you're not alone, doesn't it?" Amina looked at him, surprised by how perfectly his words matched her own thoughts. "Yes," she said. "It feels lighter." He nodded. "Sometimes a little company can change everything." She lowered her eyes slightly, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to someone understanding her so naturally. She wasn't used to someone noticing her feelings without, or needing to explain them. Hassan reached into his bag again and took out 2 small snacks. Nothing expensive. Nothing fancy. Just something simple he liked to carry. He placed one near her in the same careful way he had offered coffee yesterday. Not too close. Not too suddenly. Just gently, Amina hesitated for a moment, not because she didn't want it, but because she was overwhelmed by this simple kindness. She wasn't used to anyone thinking about her, even in small ways. She took the snack slowly and whispered, "Thank you." Hassan smiled. "You don't have to thank me every time. I'm not used to." This, she admitted softly. He didn't laugh. He didn't question her. He didn't ask her what this meant. He simply nodded, as if he understood that kindness was new to her, and he respected her honesty. They sat together, enjoying the quiet and the simple food. A gentle breeze passed over them, making the leaves above whisper softly. The moment felt ordinary, yet meaningful. Amina felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt safe. Eventually, Hassan asked softly, "Do you come here every day?" "Not every day," she replied, "but I come often. It helps me think." "What do you think about?" he asked, his voice gentle, not pushing. "Life. People," she said quietly. "And sometimes, myself." He took a slow breath, as if her answer touched him. "Thinking about yourself is important too. Most people forget to do that." She gave a tiny smile. "Sometimes it feels easier not to think." He looked at her with a kind patience in his eyes. "You don't have to share anything you're not ready to. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Amina's heart softened. She had never heard those words directed at her before. No one had ever offered to listen without expecting something in return. It made her feel like she was sitting beside someone who respected her deeply, not for her achievements, not for her voice, but simply for being herself. She didn't tell him her whole life story. She didn't open up instantly. But she did share small pieces of herself. Small truths she had kept hidden for years. "I've always been quiet," she said softly. "Sometimes people don't notice me." Hassan listened without interrupting. "I sit alone a lot," she continued. "Not because I want to, but because I don't know how to join others." Odd. He nodded gently, understanding without judgment. Some people think silence means someone is distant, but sometimes silence just means someone is thoughtful. Amina had never heard anyone describe silence that way. His words touched her heart like a warm hand placed gently on her shoulder. "You're thoughtful," he added. "I can see that." Her eyes softened, glowing with the quiet happiness of someone who finally felt seen. They talked a little more, nothing heavy, nothing complicated. They talked about the weather, about simple things they liked, about small daily routines. The conversation wasn't filled with loud excitement or dramatic moments. It was soft, natural, like two gentle waves meeting without crashing. For Amina, it was more meaningful than any loud moment could have ever been. A little bird hopped near their feet, and Hassan pointed to it with a small smile. "Look, even the bird wants to join us." Amina giggled, a soft, sweet sound she rarely let anyone hear. Hassan looked at her with a calm kindness, as if her laugh had added something beautiful to the day. Time passed without either of them noticing. The sky slowly changed color as the sun began its descent. The world around them glowed with a golden warmth that made everything look softer. Gentler, Amina felt a peace she had never experienced before. Not because someone had fixed her loneliness, not because someone had suddenly filled all the empty spaces in her life, but because someone had simply sat beside her patiently, respectfully, gently making her feel like she was not invisible at one point. She looked at him and said something she had never said to anyone before. "You make me feel like I matter." Hassan didn't react with surprise or discomfort. He didn't brush off her words or dismiss them. He looked at her with sincere eyes and said, "You do matter, more than you realize." Mina lowered her gaze, trying to hide the small shine in her eyes. She wasn't used to such kindness. It felt almost unreal, but it was real. It was happening. Someone was treating her like she was valuable. Someone was speaking to her as if she had a place in this world. Someone was sitting beside her, as if she were a queen, not because she wore something expensive, not because she had a bold personality, but because he saw her inner worth, the worth she had forgotten she had. As the sun dipped lower, Hassan stood up slowly. "I should head home," he said softly. but I'll come tomorrow. If you want, Mina nodded gently. Would like that. His smile deepened, warm and genuine. Then I'll see you. He walked away with calm steps, leaving behind a moment that Amina held close like a treasure. As she sat there watching the sky turn a deeper shade of orange, she realized something powerful. Sometimes, one person can change how you see yourself, not with big speeches or grand gestures, but with simple presence, gentle words, and quiet respect. Amina felt different. She felt lighter. She felt valued, and for the first time in many years, she walked home with a soft smile on her face, carrying a new understanding in her heart that she was never truly unwanted. She just hadn't met the right person who could see her. The days that followed felt different for Sarah. It was as if someone had gently lifted a heavy curtain that had been covering her heart for years. The simple moment of a human sitting beside her, treating her like she mattered, still replayed in her mind again and again. She had never expected that something so small could change so much inside her, but it did. She woke up the next morning with a soft smile, something she rarely wore before. She looked around her little room, noticing things she had ignored earlier: her study table, her books, her art supplies. Everything looked a little brighter now. It was not because her life had suddenly become perfect. It was because, for the first time, she saw herself the way that kind stranger had seen her, as someone worthy of respect, someone who deserved kindness, someone who mattered. As Sarah walked out of her home that morning, she felt a quiet courage inside her. She had no special plan in mind. She didn't suddenly think she could achieve everything in one day, but she did feel stronger than the day before. She felt ready to try again, and that was more than enough. When Sarah reached school, some students looked at her the same way they always did. Their expressions were indifferent, sometimes confused, as if they never understood who she was. Before, these looks would hurt her deeply, but today she walked past them with calm steps. She wasn't rude, nor was she hiding. She simply didn't let their expressions define her anymore. Something had changed inside her. Something gentle, something steady. Later that day, she sat in the school library, the same place where she used to sit alone. But now, instead of feeling lonely, she felt peaceful. She opened her notebook and began writing about everything she had experienced. The sadness, the fear, the feeling of being unwanted, and then the moment when one person changed the way she saw herself. The words came naturally, almost as if they were waiting inside her for years, waiting for her to finally release them. While she wrote, she realized that she wanted to help others who felt like her. She didn't know how yet. She didn't know when, but the thought warmed her heart. She imagined someone else sitting alone, believing they were not important, and then imagined herself walking toward them with the same kindness that had been shown to her. The idea filled her with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. After school, when Sarah returned home, she saw her mother busy with chores. Her mother looked tired, as she always did after working long hours. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. She wasn't used to expressing her feelings, especially not out loud. But something inside her whispered, "Try." So she walked closer and gently said, "Mama, can I sit with you for a moment?" Her mother looked at her, surprised but smiling softly. "Of course, sit." Yes. Sarah sat beside her mother, something she had not done in a long time. They didn't talk right away. They just sat together. And strangely, that silence felt safe. It felt warm. After a while, Sarah slowly rested her head on her mother's shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. Her mother's eyes softened, and she gently placed her hand on Sarah's head. In that quiet moment, Sarah understood something important. She had not been unwanted. She had been unseen, unheard, misunderstood perhaps, but not unwanted. There was a difference, and now she felt it clearly. That evening, Sarah helped her mother prepare dinner. She laughed a little, talked a little, and even shared a small story from her day. Her mother listened carefully, as if every word mattered. It made Sarah realize that sometimes people love deeply, but silently, and that silence can make love hard to notice. The next few days passed with small but meaningful changes. Sarah began taking care of herself more. She combed her hair in the morning not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she finally felt she deserved care. She began organizing her books, cleaning her room, and creating little goals for herself. She started drawing against something she had stopped years ago. Her drawings were filled with emotions, hope, growth, courage. She even drew a small picture of that moment on the bench where the kind stranger sat beside her. She kept that drawing safely in her notebook one afternoon. While walking home, she noticed a little girl from her neighborhood sitting alone on the steps near a shop. Her head was lowered, and she looked upset. A few months ago, Sarah might have walked past without saying anything, too scared or too lost in her own hurt to pay attention. But now she paused. She slowly walked toward the girl and sat beside her. Not too close, not too far, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked softly. The girl nodded at first, but after a moment, tears slipped from her eyes. Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't try to give advice she wasn't ready to give. She simply offered her presence, something she now understood had the power to heal. After a few minutes, the girl looked at her and whispered, "Thank you." Sarah smiled warmly. "You're welcome." As she walked home after that, she felt a special kind of happiness. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, steady, and peaceful. She realized that sometimes healing begins when we help someone else heal, even in small ways. Weeks passed, and the change inside her continued to grow. She still had difficult days. She still felt sad sometimes. But the difference was that now she didn't feel alone in her sadness. She didn't feel like she was invisible. She didn't feel like she was unwanted. One person had shown her kindness at the exact moment she needed it. And that kindness had created a small spark inside her, a spark that slowly became a warm light. Now, whenever she walked into a room, she didn't worry about who didn't notice her. She noticed herself. That was enough. Whenever she sat alone, she no longer felt forgotten. She enjoyed her own company. Whenever she faced challenges, she didn't immediately think she was weak. She reminded herself that she had survived so much already. Sarah didn't become perfect. She didn't become the most confident or the most popular person. But she became something far more powerful. She became someone who believed she deserved to exist, to be seen, to be valued. One evening, as she sat near her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, she whispered softly to herself, "I matter." It was a small sentence, but it carried the weight of her entire journey. She thought of the stranger who sat beside her that day. She didn't know their name. She didn't know where they came from or where they went. But she would always remember them as the person who treated her like she was important. When she had forgotten her own worth, she hoped that one day she could do the same for many others, not just one person, but many. She wanted to be that gentle presence, that quiet support, that warm reminder that nobody is truly unwanted at that moment. Sarah realized something beautiful. Sometimes, all someone needs is one act of pure kindness to change their entire story. And she was ready to continue her life. Ready to grow, ready to shine, and ready to help others find their light too. Her story didn't end when someone sat beside her. Her story began there,